Social media is a beautiful metaphor for life, in that at a certain point of awakening, we start to realize that we control the channel, we curate our feed, we populate our life with characters that bring certain experiences or lessons with them. We use our free will to direct these experiences, to say, I want more of this. I'm not a fan of this other thing. Or, yes, I'm all in. Let's do it. I think back to the 90s when there wasn't social media at all. And I wonder how people back then grasped manifestation. I was too young and also completely unconscious. So I was disqualified from even thinking about manifestation because I wasn't ready yet. And it's interesting because looking at some of the teachers, the principles of manifestation have been around for a very long time. And yet, sometimes, even those who are aware of the manifestation protocols and the techniques and have desires to bring certain things into their lives, they don't always know the depth of which they curate their feeds. And there almost seems to be this disconnect. For example, let's just talk about a practical example here. I was working with a client a while ago, and they were embarrassed about part of their TikTok feed that we were talking about, because they were starting to open up into the spiritual arts, and they were exploring an esoteric side, the occult side of things. But the background that they had, the identity that they were still attached to, the self-concept of them, the reflection of them when they looked in the mirror, was not supposed to be into anything related to occult or magic or esoteric teachings. And they were carrying around this outdated self-concept because they were actually already expanding into utilizing some of these techniques. And everybody has different flavors. They were testing out a flavor. But when they talked about it with me, it was very interesting because they blamed TikTok. They're like, I don't know how this came up on my feed, but it did, and I just started looking at it. And if you have any experience with TikTok, then you will know that when you first start an account, it's hard to get past all of the thirst traps. There are so many cliche videos that bombard you when you first open up your account that if you don't make it past it, then you think that everybody on TikTok is rotting their brains. In fact, it's even called brain rot. And so you have to curate your feed. You have to teach the algorithm what you like. And this person, because they were still carrying around this dated concept of themselves and that they were still embarrassed by because they were still attached to wanting to lead with a certain part of their personality that they were comfortable with, which was a very tech-oriented, rational, logical, scientific type of person. And they wanted to interact with people in that way because that's what they were used to. And so instead of seeing this gap in the transition for who they were shifting into, they blamed TikTok for curating their feed for them. And so this was part of our shadow work coaching, so I brought this up to them. We had a conversation about it. and brought it into the light of awareness, which is what shadow work is all about. It's understanding how we slip into these thought patterns and behavior patterns that work against us and keep us small and keep us unhappy. Because when we don't understand that we are curating our life, and when we have these outdated self-concept images that we are attached to by default and practice, decades sometimes of practice in the making, we don't understand why we decide to do certain things, say certain things, and therefore create certain realities in our life to be played out. And it reminds me of when I had a personal example when I was on a call with somebody that I met at a conference that I went for business reasons, but they ended up having spiritual tracks there, and I met this person at lunch. And we remained not really friends, more like distant colleagues, talking every couple of years. And I got in touch with them a couple of years ago, and they had a conference call that they brought somebody else in who I hadn't met before. They were saying how we met. And they said that we met at a spiritual conference. And I instinctively, this was my shadow, the same thing that my client did. I did the exact same thing. Without thinking, I corrected them and I said, no, it was a business conference, which then created this distance of how we were both coming to the relationship co-creation table. And this was in a professional setting. And I felt uncomfortable talking about my spirituality in a professional setting. But this was a good friend of theirs, so there was no reason to be uncomfortable by this. But it's actually something that has stuck with me over the years as an example of my shadow playing out these three-dimensional dynamics and keeping everything at the surface and hiding parts of myself, especially when I am presented with wanting to put a certain foot forward in a particular context that I have learned over time that this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to deny all esoteric or spiritual things in certain contexts. And I'm not sure if it had any real impact on that particular setting. But the reason that it has stuck with me for so long is because it is a reminder that that was a mistake that I made in curating my feed. Because had I said yes, it was a spiritual and business conference, or if I shared, yes, I thought it was just business, but then when I got there, it turned out that there was this whole playground of spiritual lectures and workshops to go to, and I was loving it. And we met at lunch, and it was a really great conversation that we had. That is more in alignment with authenticity and more apt to actually create conversations and opportunities as a result by magnetizing that part of our personality's operating systems. When you think about how you're showing up in the world, you're showing up with certain sets of behaviors, certain beliefs, and certain alignment of words that you speak out in the open to other people. And when you speak and when you behave, this activates certain parts of other people's databases, and it brings to light the ways that they want to connect with you. So imagine that you are two precious gemstones that are interacting, and you show a couple of your facets. That will activate somebody else's facets. And then the conversations and the decisions that you both bring out into the open will change depending on which facets are active. So when we make errors in our self-concept and we don't update our behavior patterns or our speech patterns as a result, it actually keeps us locked into an older existence. It keeps us stuck because we're not able to activate and magnetize the parts of people that we are yearning to. So if you think about what I magnetized in the conference call, I magnetized a surface shutdown 3D non-spiritual connection with these people. And initially, what was being offered to me was something different, but I inadvertently dismissed it, not intentionally, right? But this was the reflexive behavior patterns that had been ingrained in me for quite some time. And just like my client who was like, well, I don't know I don't know how this got on my feed, but it's interesting, so I started watching it. And I gently called him out, where I was like, it's hard to get to that side of TikTok. I've gotten to it before, and it takes a concerted effort of scrolling past lots of itty-bitty outfits and dancing and car shows and all sorts of the mainstream thirst traps that you see. But these are the ways that we unconsciously remain in our fixed shadow and our old selves. So when we talk about curating our feed and our life feed, it's really important to understand how we are selecting our presentation of ourselves, how we are showing up in the world matters a lot. But another part that matters is how we choose. So one is more passive and is more sort of secondary, and the other is more active. And I find that what's really important is that we need to actually be able to say no. And this is a very powerful feed curator. Just like when you're swiping past the thirst traps that will literally take you to the brain rot side of TikTok or the other social media algorithms that may not make you feel great inside. I was talking to somebody recently who their experience with social media was one where they always felt that there were people that were being inauthentic, or where there was almost like a showcase of this is what we have, or there was this unconscious tie to sexuality, almost like hooking into the person's sexual drive, which I completely agree. And when you don't make it past those parts of the social media algorithms, it's almost like a metaphor for your ability to say no in life, your ability to have boundaries, to understand that this isn't going to lead me. I see the same thing on the conspiracy side of social media platforms too, where it creates a reality for people that is highly addictive and in many cases is soul crushing. It is leading into a nightmare. And what's crazy is that many people actually know that where they focus their energy, their thought, their intention, their behavior, and their alignment, that manifests worlds. And even though they know that, there's something about the hooking into those energy centers and their mind that keeps them locked into nightmare narratives. And it's hard to break away from, especially when you're frightened But imagine for a moment that you are a powerful manifester and somebody's trying to create a world that is a nightmare and they hook into you. What happens? All of your manifestation energy goes into creating that world that you actually don't want any part of. You're horrified at it, right? And so we create these materializations through the unification of our thoughts, our energy, our actions, time that we invest in there. And these are like consciousness traps, in my opinion. Just like getting sucked into some of the other darker parts of social media, it can actually influence our perspective of what social media is, what the world is. I was listening to a podcast recently of a conscious venture capitalist and who I really respect a lot. I don't know a lot about them other than just this introduction. But they were being asked about this big evil narrative, and because they're in a position of being quite wealthy and understanding the dynamics of the interplays in the world. And so the interviewer was saying, well, what do you think about this big evil agenda? And this person was like, well, the way I see it is that there are equal parts of light and dark. And the circles I run in, I see a lot of wealthy people that are doing amazing things for the world. Clearly, he's living in an entirely different reality. But he did acknowledge the presence of the other. But he was like, yeah, but the people that I'm running with, they're doing amazing things. We're doing amazing things. And at some point, the interviewer was like, well, what would you say to people that, think that this is kind of far-fetched and idealistic, and when are you really going to do this and do that? And he was like, it's already happening. It's been happening for years. And so there's this entire other chapter that when you're stuck in some of the nightmare narratives, you can't access because you're hooked into the nightmare. And you're generating with all of your energy and all of your intent, and perhaps maybe not intent, but you're literally creating and manifesting that. Now, I do believe that there are options, but I don't believe that we talk enough about the fact that those options exist. And this is why it's really important that we don't get sucked into thirst traps or nightmares, because it actually shifts our worldview. I remember when I was doing some research in the conspiracy side of things, it literally started to change how I would see things. And that's one of the reasons that I had to back away from it, because I could see that it almost created this filter over my eyes, that everything was starting to be filtered through that lens. And it was creating this fixed line of sight that it actually took my brain, the way I was perceiving things, and it changed the symbols, the way I was decoding symbols, the way I was interpreting people's speech and language. It was freaky to see. And not only in myself, but also other people that were much deeper into it. And so I had to make the conscious decision to stop looking in that direction and to look in other directions and to curate my life feed to where there were options. And then I started finding that there were indeed options, and that there have been options for a long time. And this is the beauty of curating your feed. Your life's feed, the life system has an algorithm. It actually does. And we wire our physiology, we wire our perceptual system to attach to a particular side, just like social media. We curate those experiences. And so with great power comes great responsibility, comes great choice and great wisdom. And that is at the macro level, but it also works at the micro level. So the relationships that we choose to prioritize over others, who we say and what we say yes to versus no to, actually creates this beautiful kaleidoscope of our human experience that when we are unconscious, we believe is TikTok's fault. Well, I don't know why this happened. It's just somebody else gave it to me. No, it's actually we have the choice. We do have the choice. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always a straightforward choice. Sometimes there are ripple effects to our choices. There are consequences to our decisions. If we start hooking up with one person and they come with a series of problems, and 20 years down the road, we're confronted with the depth of those problems, we might feel victimized in that moment, and oftentimes people do. But if we were to rewind all the way back to the beginning, we would often see that there were red flags the entire time, that our intuition was talking to us the entire time, that our friends and our family were trying to convince us not to go down that road, and we were like, I am fine, I'll make a decision for myself. And then we get to the end of that road, we get to the mountain of terribleness, and then we feel like we had no choice. That is what the beautiful part of this awakening experience is, to understand cause and effect at a much, much higher level than perhaps in the beginning when we were like children. We didn't understand that throwing ourselves off of a roof would break a leg. We learn that as we get older, as we mature. So we learn how to make decisions better, but there's another level of decision-making understanding that I find is part of the awakening journey. And that is why it's important to be mindful about how you're showing up, who you say yes to, and most importantly, who you say no to and why. And in that way, you can curate the best experience of life for yourself. So listen, I am a coach. I have so many different labels. I don't know what to call myself anymore. I'm experimenting with different SEO keywords. I help people awaken. I help people design their lives. And this can be in love. This can be with work and finding purpose. This can be with opening their gifts and their spiritual awakening. If you feel the call to work together, let me know. You can reach out to me at sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com.